channel, or welcome back to my channel. This is the first in a new series that I will be doing. It is called Makeup and Marvels, and what I will be doing in this series is I will be doing my makeup, but I will be talking about something completely unrelated. In this video, obviously, it'll be Lucille Ball, and I want to give some shout outs to some people who inspired me to do this kind of video. The first one is Jamie French. She does a series called Makeup and Movies where she reviews bad 90s movies, and it's hilarious. She works really hard on her videos and she does a great job. And then the second one is the great Bailey Sarian. She has millions of subscribers and she does Makeup Murder Mystery Mondays, and I kind of think she might have started the whole trend of makeup and story time. It's everywhere. Makeup and story time is kind of everywhere. It's all over TikTok especially. She's also fantastic. And then I want to give like a double shout out to Sydney Black. She does makeup and history, and I think the kinds of videos that I'm going to be doing are the most similar to hers. She obviously talks about historical events and historical figures, and I'm also going to be talking about people and events from the past. So enough of the shout outs. I'm going to get into this. I have been a lifelong Lucille Ball fan, and the reason I was extra inspired to do this video about her is because they are in production making a biopic, I've never heard that word pronounced, but biopic about Lucille Ball and her life. And I thought that this was a really, really good opportunity to do a video like this because of that as well. And they cast, I'm curious what you think. If you have thoughts on any of this or corrections or things to point out or also add to the story, please do let me know. I would love to hear your input, but I'm curious what people think about the pick for who is going to play Lucille Ball. Right now they're filming and it is Nicole Kidman. So it's gonna be Nicole Kidman. Originally it was gonna be Cate Blanchett, and I don't know what happened with her or why she's not gonna be playing Lucille Ball anymore, but a lot of people feel like it should be Deborah Messing because I guess in the Will and Grace series, which I never watched, I'm sure it's a great series, I just never watched it, I don't know why. They did like a homage to I Love Lucy, and she played Lucille Ball, Lucy's character, Lucy Ricardo, in that homage, and I guess she did a great job. I've seen clips, I'll insert a clip here of it.
Yes, with Vitamin, you can spoon your way to health. All you do is take a tablespoon after every meal. It's so tasty, too.
And it was well loved and funny, so a lot of people feel like it should be her. I don't know. I don't really know how I feel about it being Nicole Kidman. I don't feel one way or another really, actually, so I am just excited to see how well they do. So it's written and directed by Aaron Sorkin. He's done a lot of stuff, not much that I've seen actually, but he wrote the film and screenplay for A Few Good Men and An American President, and he also did some TV like The West Wing, which I know was a really big hit, and so I'm hoping that it is really good. All I remember really is from A Few Good Men. You can't handle the truth, that scene that would play in the commercials.
You can't handle the truth!
And then he's also done several other biopics. He did Charlie Wilson's War, he did The Social Network, the Facebook one, and he also did Moneyball. So we'll see. It could be really, really good. I am looking forward to finally seeing it when it does come out. Now, let's talk a little bit about Lucille Ball herself. Like I said, I've been a lifelong fan, so I do know quite a bit just offhand, but I have my notes here, so I did put together kind of a thread to talk about. So she was born in Jamestown, New York, and her character, Lucy Ricardo, in the show I Love Lucy, was born in Jamestown as well. Actually, there's an episode where it turns out she was born in West Jamestown because they had a terrible time tracking down her birth certificate. So she was born in Jamestown, New York on August 6th, 1911, and she was born Lucille Desiree Ball, which I think it's kind of funny, Desiree, and then she ends up marrying Desi Arnaz. Her parents were Henry Ball and Desiree, or Dee Dee Ball. She went by Dee Dee. Her father was a lineman for Bell Telephone Company. And as part of her father's work for Bell Telephone, they had to move a lot. And so they moved from Jamestown to Anaconda, Montana, and later to Trenton, New Jersey. In February of 1915, while living in Michigan, a town I can't pronounce, Wyandotte, her father contracted and died from typhoid fever when she was only 3 years old and he was only 27 years old. So very, very tragic and very hard on her whole family. In fact, I read somewhere, and I want it to be not true, but it could be true, that her mother would tie her up in the backyard because at the time of her father's death, her mother was pregnant with her little brother, Fred Ball. So she was quite overwhelmed, but I don't condone anyone tying their child up in the backyard. She did have a relationship with her mother until her mother died. So after her father died, her mother went back to New York so that her parents, her mother's parents, could help raise the children. And they ended up living in a summer resort village on Lake Chautauqua, which was west of downtown Jamestown. There was a nearby park and everything. It was great. Lucy loved it, everyone loved it, and things were looking up. And 4 years later, her mother, Dee Dee, married Edward Peterson. And it seems like from what I've read, he was a decent man. But what I did read about his parents is that while her mother, Dee Dee, and Edward Peterson were off looking for work, his parents would take care of Lucy and her brother, Fred. And they were a puritanical Swedish couple, so very, very strict beliefs, didn't have mirrors in the house. So they chastised Lucy, finding her admiring herself in the bathroom mirror at one point. Now, when Lucille Ball was in her preteen years, about 12, her stepfather encouraged her to audition for a chorus line with the Shriners Convention, so that kind of ignited her interest in show business. Thankfully, right? She belonged in show business. Now, there's a big event that happened when she was a teenager that was a little bit of a turning point for her. When she was 16, her grandfather brought home a .22 caliber rifle. I don't really know what that means. I don't know anything about guns, but he brought home a rifle and they were going to play with it. The kids were going to play with it. And so they had the neighbors over to practice target shooting and whatnot. So they invited the neighbors over to play, and what do you think happened? One of the neighbors got shot. So the boy survived but was paralyzed from the waist down, and the neighbors sued Lucille Ball's family for everything that they had. Everything gone, just gone. Her grandfather never worked again, and it really ruined them. They were forced to relocate to a small apartment in Jamestown. And you know, by that time, Lucy was almost 18, and that's her childhood essentially. But let's rewind a little bit and talk about her interest in show business. So at 14 years old, apparently Lucy was dating kind of a bad boy, somebody her mother didn't want her to date, and to try to distract her from it, she continued to encourage her to go into show business, and it seemed to work. So she enrolled Lucy when she was about 14 or 15 in a school for the dramatic arts in New York City, where Betty Davis was a fellow student, where she was told she would never make it, wouldn't be successful, and said it to her face repeatedly. And luckily for all of us, she didn't give up. So she then began working for Hattie Carnegie in New York City as a model. That was when she was ordered to dye her hair blonde. She was blonde for a while, and she looks like amazing. She looked amazing with every hair color. She did get rheumatic fever not too long after that, and she was unable to work for a little while. But after that, she was able to return to acting or modeling at the time. She went back to Carnegie and then also became the Chesterfield cigarette girl. So she was a model for cigarettes under the name Diane Belmont, which she did use for a little while. And she started getting some chorus work on Broadway, really starving artist kind of stuff. She worked with Earl Carroll on the Vanities and with Florence Ziegfeld on the Follies. She actually did end up having a little part in the film Ziegfeld Follies later on. to Hollywood, and she got a lot of parts in B movies. In fact, she got the honorable title of being Queen of the B movies for a little while. She had a small part as a Goldwyn girl in this movie called Roman Scandals that came out in 1933, and this movie is just horribly racist and sexist. I have a little clip, and in this clip that I'm going to show you just a little snippet of Lucy's part. There's blackface, and there are all these beautiful blonde women just sitting around getting pampered, and the lyrics to the song are "Stay young and beautiful if you want to be loved." It's really, really upsetting, but that is what the ideals were perpetuated at the time and still kind of today, right? Anyway, moving on. So she permanently moved to Hollywood and had a contract with RKO Pictures. She did a little movie with the Three Stooges and a little movie with the Marx Brothers. So she was working with some pretty famous people. She appeared in some movies with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, and this was all in the late 20s and into the 30s. Now, Lucy, she kept thinking she was gonna get her big break, but really at this time, she was, like I said, the queen of the bees. Now, in the late 30s, she started picking up radio work, and she did a radio show called The Phil Baker Show, and then also The Wonder Show. Now, fast forward to some years later, it was in 1948, she was doing a radio show called My Favorite Husband, and it was that show that got attention, and CBS asked her to develop it for television. So that's the beginning of I Love Lucy. We'll get to that. Now, in 1940, Lucille Ball did a movie called Too Many Girls, and one of her co-stars was Desiderio Alberto Iriacha Arnez III. I probably butchered that. And that is where they met. And supposedly it was infatuation at first sight, and it must have been because they eloped that same year, so I believe it. Now, Lucille Ball did file for divorce in 1944, but they ended up reconciling and staying together. He was already unfaithful to her. He was unfaithful. It was really disappointing thing to be a child so in love with I Love Lucy show and then grow up into adulthood and learn all of these adult things about I Love Lucy, Lucille Ball, and Desi Arnaz, and that it wasn't as amazing as I thought. So they reconcile in 1944. Lucy's still doing B movies and radio, and in 1948 Lucy's doing this radio show called My Favorite Husband, and it gets picked up by CBS, and they want to adapt it for television. And Lucy agreed, but she insisted on working with her real-life husband, Desi Arnaz. And the CBS peeps, the executives were not into that because it's an interracial marriage, and that had never been a thing done on television before, and it was still very much looked down upon, and it still is today in many regions of the United States and elsewhere. So they ended up taking it on the road and doing it live as a vaudeville act, and it did really well. So they convinced CBS to go ahead with it. And this would be one of the many groundbreaking firsts that this show was able to make happen on television. Now, because their marriage was so badly strained, there was some hope that this could save it. As we all know, that didn't happen. Spoiler alert. So awesome, right? The show is up and running. People are okay with the fact that it's an interracial couple, and it's making lots and lots of money. Now, before the show started, I read that they either had 2 or 3 miscarriages. I read conflicting information. They did end up having their daughter, Lucy Desiree Arnaz, in 1951, and then their son, Desi Arnaz Jr., just 2.5 years later, and he was the baby that was born on the show. They did schedule her cesarean section for that episode of I Love Lucy where she goes into labor and has the baby. And that is another first that they did that was groundbreaking on television. television to have a pregnant woman on television, and not only that, but to have her child in an episode, her real life child. They couldn't say the word pregnant. There were definitely a lot of rules that were imposed, and now it's kind of like, come on guys, what's the big deal? But I guess it was a huge deal. Back then it was too suggestive of, I guess, what it took to get there. I don't know. They even got approval from religious officials. And so when the episode aired, it had 44 million viewers. And if you think about that, not a lot of people had TVs. Now, another first that they had on the show was having the couples' beds pushed together. All other series up until then had the couples' beds separate as twin beds, which, you know, that couldn't have been happening, especially if she was pregnant. Or they couldn't even say pregnant in the episode. They had to say enceinte, which is French for pregnant. So now, despite having 2 babies finally and a successful production company, Desilu, and a super successful show that is still very, very popular today, their marriage was still really, really strained. Desi Arnaz could not keep it in his pants, and she knew, and she was just beyond embarrassed at this point. Like, there was this story where a gossip magazine was on set and it talked about his philandering, and she went and she grabbed it and she said, "Let me read this," and she took it to her trailer, and then when she came out, she threw it at him and said, "Heck, I could tell them more stories." Apparently it could get pretty tense on set. So despite all that, they did have a super successful show and a super successful production company. They did a couple of movies together in the 50s still before they finally divorced. The Long Long Trailer and Forever Darling. Lucille Ball was the first woman to head a production company because after their divorce, she bought out Arnaz's share and she became the head of the production company. And that's when she says that they put the S at the end of her name, balls, because she had to, I guess, grow a pair of balls, because before that she said she just showed up and acted and Desi handled all of the business stuff. But then she had to get a little bit cutthroat and run a production company, and she did a really good job. They produced a lot of really great shows. It was so successful that she was even able to buy out RKO Pictures, which is where she had one of her initial contracts when she was trying to get into show business, and it became Desilu Studios, which is pretty badass. And another first that I forgot to mention, I'm gonna chime in right here, of I Love Lucy, is that it was the first show to perform in front of a live studio audience. Desi Arnaz is the one who came up with it, and he had many brilliant ideas, and then he would just start drinking more and more later on in his life and just kind of forget them. Apparently, I remember hearing somebody in an interview basically say that. So Lucy made Desilu very, very successful. She bought it from Desi after the divorce was final in 1960, and they produced shows like The Untouchables, Mission Impossible, Star Trek, things like that. And then she ended up selling it in 1968 to Gulf and Western, and they transformed it into Paramount Pictures. So Desilu is now Paramount Pictures. Now, after their divorce, and it was kind of bitter. I mean, she was mad. I'd be mad too. He was not being cool. They did remain close and spoke mostly fondly of each other until his death in 1986. He died before she did. But there is this Barbara Walters special where a young Barbara Walters is interviewing Lucille Ball. Insert the clip. And Lucille Ball is just talking in front of her now husband, Gary Morton. So I wonder how he felt about this, but she was talking about how she had married a loser. All he could do was build things up partway and then just tear him down, and he was a loser. So she was feeling pretty bitter toward him. And this was a while after the divorce. So I'll insert it here and you can see what I'm talking about.
Lucy was so good at being funny that people forget she was also a great beauty. In fact, it was her looks that got her in the door, first as a model and then as an actress in B-movies. In 1940, she appeared in a movie with a Cuban singer who would eventually steal her heart. They were married in November of the year, and 10 years later, they approached CBS about doing a sitcom, loosely based on their marriage together. They called it I Love Lucy. Despite strong prejudice against Latin Americans, Desi Arnaz built the empire known as Desilu Studios from the ground up and gained a reputation as one of the smartest businessmen in Hollywood. There has never been a success like Lucy. She was on CBS for 23 consecutive years and won 4 Emmys and countless other awards. By anyone's measure, she was the queen of comedy. On camera, Lucy and Ricky Ricardo exaggerated marital troubles and made us all laugh. The public thought they were the perfect match. Off camera, the marriage fell apart. In 1960, Lucy filed for divorce amidst allegations that Desi drank too much and cheated on her. America was heartbroken. So apparently was Lucy. But they managed to remain friends until his death in 1986. When I sat down with Lucy and Gary, I wasn't sure what to expect. She was 66 at the time, Desi was still alive, and the subject of her first marriage was still painful. I mean, when you and Desi were married, you had everything.
He had nothing. He was he had his own band, and he was in a play in New York, and he was a kid.
Well, you were married. But
When we
then,
were first married.
at the success.
Then we built up a lot of things.
Right.
But
then
even
when you
while they were
proposed
building,
it-
they would not believe that he was doing the building.
Yeah.
And he was doing the successful building of a very well-run empire. I was doing the acting and having the children. I had no part of it. I took that on much later. But I knew what he had suffered, really, and how he did not deserve that. And just because he was Cuban and once a bongo player did not warrant calling him any of those names. And he worked very hard and got a lot of respect for what he did, and they forgot about that.
You had the success. The marriage was perfect. It was everything. And then it fell apart.
That was his problem.
And I heard you were devastated.
I couldn't understand it any more than, you know, for the same reason you're asking the question. It seemed like we had
I
everything.
think people still don't understand.
I don't either.
Oh, I think that's past.
It's certainly
I
past.
think it's past.
But we certainly did have everything and worked very hard to get it, and 2 beautiful children, and what else can you ask for? And I think if Desi were here right now, he would agree that it was...
But when we're talking about the marriage, you had said, I didn't make the same marriage mistake twice. This marriage is very different. This man is very different.
I'm cute.
He's not a loser. I married a loser before. He could win high stakes. He could work very hard. He was brilliant. But he had to lose.
This man's sweet.
I like getting up in the morning.
So was
see?
the other man, sweet and generous, overly generous, but he had to lose. He had to fail at everything that he built up. Everything he built, he had to break down. And he still claims he's the same way.
And is this marriage itself very different?
Yes, very different. We have a home that is lived in. We had many houses before, but we didn't have a home that he was ever in.
Who takes care of whom here?
Well, I think together we take care of one another. When she's down, I try
Gary.
to get her feeling good.
Gary. Gary has for a long time. Long time.
Tell me the truth.
Well, thank you.
Well, he just assumed that role beautifully, and I was grateful for it, and I encouraged it. And in many, many ways, I don't think he's even aware of. He has responsibilities, I think, that he's not even aware of. When I found out the kind of man I had married, it takes time, you know, you're not
You didn't know
sure.
when you
You're
married him?
not for sure. I'd only known him a year, and I sat and thought about it for a year, and I really didn't want to get married again. I had 2 beautiful children, and when you've had an unhappy marriage and you've disappointed millions of people by getting a divorce, you know, you think more than one. You don't run off in a week.
And not very long after, Lucy was starring in a Broadway musical called Wildcat, and that's where she met her husband, her second husband, Gary Morton, and she would be married to Gary until her death in 1989. And according to Lucille Ball, he claimed to have never seen an episode of I Love Lucy because of his hectic work schedule, and he was also a comic. So do we find that to be believable? I don't know. Now, after I Love Lucy ended in 1960, she did The Lucy Show from 1962 to 1968, which starred Gail Gordon, who she worked with quite a bit, and also Vivian Vance, aka Ethel Mertz. And then she did Here's Lucy from 1968 to 1974, which also featured Gail Gordon and her real-life children. children, Lucy Arnaz and Desi Arnaz Jr. And those shows were quite successful. I never really watched them. They were quite successful though. And she would have guest stars like Carol Burnett and Arnold Schwarzenegger. I will put in a couple fun clips right now.
Oh, please gather round me, brethren, and listen to this hymn about how evil battles virtue and the fight to sink or swim. There's a lost sheep that I know of, caught in Satan's web of sin. And I sing for the forgiveness of the evil plight she's in. They call her hard-hearted Hannah. To see men suffer. It hurts like I saw her at the seashore with a great big pan. There was Hannah pouring water on a drowning man.
To try to act in her later years, but honestly, as she got older, the acclaim for her work went downhill. She did a movie with Henry Fonda that was actually kind of fun called Yours, Mine, and Ours that I remember watching when I was a kid. And then she did, and when she was much older, a movie called Stone Pillow where she played an elderly homeless woman, and it was a drama and it did not do well. It did not have good reviews. And then she did a movie called Auntie Mame, which was a take on a Broadway musical, and it did not get good reviews either. And she tried to do a show called Life with Lucy that only lasted like 2 months, and it was canceled. So kind of declined in her twilight years, but you know what? She left such a legacy. Who cares? Let's just ignore that. Now, in April of 1989, Lucy was complaining of chest pain at her home in Beverly Hills, and she was taken to the Cedars-Sinai Hospital, where she was diagnosed with a dissecting aortic aneurysm, and she underwent surgery to repair her aorta and a successful 7-hour valve replacement. But then just 8 days later, on April 26th, Lucille Ball awoke with severe back pain and lost consciousness, and she died at 5:47 a.m. at the age of 77. Doctors determined that she had died from a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm, not directly related to her surgery. I don't know if I believe that. Could have been, but that's what they said. So we'll go with that. Her remains were cremated and she was interned at a forest lawn. And then in 2002, her children had her moved to the Hunt family plot. Hunt was her mother's maiden name, in Jamestown, New York. That is where her parents and her grandparents are buried, and her brother as well. I tried to make something of my hair for the final look, but it is kind of beyond. I just really need to wash it. So that's the life and story of the late, great Lucille Ball. Of course, it's not comprehensive, and as I said in the beginning, if you have anything interesting to add or corrections to make, I don't think I got anything wrong, but we all make mistakes, so please comment in the comments below. I would love that. I hope you enjoyed my first episode of Makeup and Marvels. If you did, please consider subscribing. I will be doing this as a series, and I'm thinking about who or what I want to talk about next. If you have any suggestions, please let me know in the comments below as well. Leave a comment, say hello, how are you? What's going on? Anyway, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.
Fancy pants, you're a pussyfootin' critter. When you see a gal, you skitter. Hey, you! Fancy pants, oh, you dropped your pretty hanky. Mama's gonna spank ye. Hey! Polaroid! Women who crave men wanna love cavemen. Say, angel boy, show some grit. That's what you gotta get. Hey! Fancy pants, you're a highfalutin' geezer, afraid to take a gal and squeeze her. Hey, you! Fancy pants, run to mama for protection. How's your stamp collection? Hey! Panty waist, lookin' at us and stompin' and cussin'. What you scared about? Take a chance. If you're rootin' and tootin',